Imagine that you were a woman whose husband has gone away on a business trip.
Field eyes.
This is Matt Amodio. At the time I'm writing this, he is currently on the second longest winning streak in the history of the classic game show, Jeopardy! Matt has won more than 30 games in a row, most of which have been big-time runaways decided long before Final Jeopardy! And he's amassed more than $1 million in winnings along the way. So how does he do it? What is it that separates Matt Amodio from almost every other Jeopardy! Contestant? Believe it or not, there is a certain level of strategy involved in the game of Jeopardy! Matt's strategy centers around one core tenet:
Control.
More specifically, taking control out of the hands of his opponents. He does this in a few ways. First, Matt purposefully takes his time when answering questions, as he often takes noticeable pauses and draws out his words as he delivers his responses, sometimes even when he's absolutely sure he's giving the correct answer.
What's polar bear?
Oh, and while we're on the topic of the way Matt gives his answers, he's become famous for starting all of his responses with
What's?
Correct grammar be damned.
What's Stanislavski? What's elephant? What's McConaughey?
He does this because, one, he can. Answers on Jeopardy! Just have to be in the form of a question, not grammatically correct. And two, because it simplifies the whole process. It's one less piece that his brain has to keep track of and one more variable of the game that he can control. Matt plays from the bottom, meaning he usually goes for the highest value clues first. By doing this, Matt is able to amass a relatively high score right off the bat before beginning his search for the daily double.
Oh, there's a daily double.
Because he does this so early on in the game, it's less risky to bet all that money he racked up from the bottom of the board. While at the same time, if Matt does hit on the daily double, the game starts to look out of reach even before the end of the first round. In turn, this large score from the first round allows Matt to bet big on the two daily doubles in Double Jeopardy! Which often leads to scores high enough to give him complete agency over the game, and thus he secures the win before Final Jeopardy! Matt's use of the daily double would be considered the best ever were it not for the man whom Matt recently passed for second all-time on the consecutive wins list, James Holtzauer. James defines his strategy as strategically aggressive. In fact, it was James who pioneered the strategy of playing from the bottom, and while it might seem like a basic and perhaps even obvious tactic, it really wasn't very common before James's time on the show. James is a professional sports bettor, and so it should come as no surprise that he is the one true king of the daily double. James wielded the daily double like the Grim Reaper wields its scythe, using them to harvest the souls of his victims by crushing their morale with his astronomically huge bets.
Enemy nuke incoming! It's over!
Holtzauer was so deadly with the doubles that many viewers of the show believed that he had broken the game of Jeopardy! Entirely. James, however, didn't see it like that. Instead, he likened his paradigm-shifting performance on Jeopardy! To what Takahiro Kobayashi did in the world of competitive eating during the early 2000s. Kobayashi introduced an entirely new approach to competitive eating, employing innovative strategies like pre-competition stomach expansion and the development of the Solomon method, which drastically cuts down on chewing time. With these innovations, Kobayashi was able to obliterate the all-time record for most hot dogs consumed in 10 minutes, as he downed 50 dogs at the 2001 4th of July Nathan's hot dog eating contest, a total that was nearly double that of the previous record holder. Speaking of records, Holtzauer's all-in approach to daily doubles allowed him to write his name in the Jeopardy! Record books. Over and over and over again. James holds the record for the highest single-day winnings on an episode of Jeopardy! As he racked up a ludicrous $131,127 during the episode that aired on April 17, 2019. As if that weren't enough on its own, he also holds the record for the second highest one-day score, and the third highest, and the fourth, and well, I think you get the idea at this point. I'll put it like this. The top 10 one-day Jeopardy! Scores would make for the worst Watch Mojo video ever made, and if you've ever seen their videos, then you understand the gravity of that statement. His complete control over the high score leaderboard might lead you to suspect that James Holtzauer must also hold the record for most cumulative money made during a run on Jeopardy! However, that title belongs to the most recognizable game show contestant of all time, Ken Jennings.
A software engineer from Salt Lake City, Utah, Ken Jennings.
Ken transcends Jeopardy! And game shows, and probably even television as a whole. He's a pop culture icon. People who have never seen a single episode of Jeopardy! Still know who Ken Jennings is. He He rose to household name status during his 74-game Jeopardy winning streak in 2004. Let me put into perspective just how crazy this streak was. Prior to the year 2003, the most consecutive games a Jeopardy contestant could win before being forced to retire was capped at 5. And beyond that, even after the cap was removed, the record for longest win streak was just 8 consecutive games. Again, Ken won 74. The conversation surrounding who the GOAT of Jeopardy contestants is starts and ends with Ken Jennings. Ken is a master of Jeopardy's signaling device, also known as a buzzer.
The buzzer is sort of what separates the winner from the two non-winners.
He has the buzzer timing down to a science, to such an extent that he was able to compete with a supercomputer that was programmed specifically for Jeopardy. Jennings described his buzzer strategy in an interview from February 2020 in the following words. Quote, "If you watch it for decades like I had, you internalize the rhythms of Alex's voice, and then the whole cycle, because you see it 60 times an evening. Alex reads a clue, there's a beat, somebody buzzes in, gets called on, you hear the staccato of it in your head, almost like a pulse. So I found, without even thinking about it, I can get into a rhythm and find the exact right fraction of a second for that buzz. If I think about it, I can't do it. It's very much a Zen thing. At this point, it's just part of how I'm wired." Let's be honest, we all know these strategies are not the main reason that Matt Amodio, James Holtzauer, and Ken Jennings were able to climb to the top of the Jeopardy mountain. Instead, those strategies are really more like the interesting cherries on top of these 7-figure sundaes. What really sets these three apart and makes them Jeopardy's greatest ever players is the obvious thing. These three guys are just freakishly intelligent. They literally just know more stuff than everyone else, and that's kind of what Jeopardy is. But the point of all of this is, these three incredibly smart individuals used their nearly superhuman intelligence to dominate a game show. But what if someone who was just as smart, or maybe even more intelligent than these guys, used all of that brainpower not just to dominate a game show within its rules, but to break one entirely? This is Michael Larson, the biggest cheater in game show history. Game shows have been around since the dawn of TV, and actually even longer, as technically, the first ever game shows were broadcast as radio programs as far back as the 1930s. In the early days, we're talking mainly the 1950s now, the most popular format for televised game shows was the quiz show. These were effectively just trivia competitions. Think of a more basic proto-version of Jeopardy! Perhaps the most popular of these quiz shows were the $64,000 Question and 21. These shows experienced massive levels of popularity in the 50s, mainly due to their high stakes and the potential for big payouts. Of course, the quiz show empire would eventually come crashing down, but we'll get back to that in a little bit. For now, we turn our attention to the decades that followed the quiz show boom and to what I like to consider the
Golden age of game shows.
When I think of game shows, the first images that usually pop into my mind are those from the 70s and 80s. Lots of blinking analog lights, wood paneling, and sets that just look like they absolutely reek of cigarette smoke. That's what classic game shows are all about. The top tier shows from this period are many, including Family Feud, The Newlywed Game, $20,000 Pyramid, Match Game, Let's Make a Deal, Hollywood Squares, and The Price is Right, for God's sakes, hosted by the king himself, Bob Barker. And that's just a few. There are many, many more, including our new friend Mr. Larson's game of choice, Press Your Luck.
As they play the most exciting game of their lives from Television City in Hollywood, it's time to press your luck.
Press Your Luck debuted on September 19th, 1983, and would go on to air more than 750 episodes during its 4-year production run. For those who are less familiar, here's a quick rundown on how the game of Press Your Luck is played. Just like Jeopardy, each game of Press Your Luck has 3 contestants, usually a returning champion and 2 new challengers.
We've torched a couple once in a while.
While a returning champion can win up to 5 games in a row, they would be forced to retire if they accumulated more than $50,000 in total winnings. The game consists of 4 rounds, with there being 2 different types of rounds, the first of which is general knowledge trivia. A question is asked. The contestants buzz in. The fastest gives an answer. 3 answers, including the one the first contestant just gave, are revealed. The 2 other contestants pick an answer. The correct answer is revealed. Spins are awarded. 3 for a correct buzz-in, 1 for a correct follow-up. Repeat the process times 3. Following the first 4 questions, the game shifts over to
The big board.
a 5x6 rectangle of prizes and hazards that changes almost constantly. Using spins earned in the trivia round, contestants take turns playing on the big board. The contestant who earned the fewest number of spins goes first. If a spin lands on a prize, the value of that prize is added to the contestant's bank.
Stop at pick a corner. 1750, 1500 in spin, or golf clubs.
The contestant then chooses if they want to pass their remaining spins to another player or press their luck and spin again. However, if a contestant doesn't land on a prize, oh, well, that inevitably means they got a whammy.
Stop at 8. Whammy.
Witnesses around the world report seeing monsters. Are they real or imaginary? Science searches for answers.
Field eyes.
No whammies, no whammies, no whammies. Any Press Your Luck contestant worth their salt has uttered those hallowed words. Whammies are a lot like NFTs. If you get one, you're gonna lose all of your money. If a contestant gets 4 whammies, then they are permanently out of the game. So that's Press Your Luck. Build up the biggest bank possible and avoid the whammy at all costs. And let me tell you, no one has ever avoided the whammy like Michael Larson. Before his appearance on Press Your Luck, Michael Larson was, of all things, an ice cream truck driver. Now, I've got a little something to say about ice cream truck drivers. I feel like they're always getting dragged for being creepy or nefarious, but that reputation is completely unfair. These people are doing God's work every day, out on the streets, slinging all the classics like drumsticks, firecrackers, the SpongeBob popsicle. Let's show these people a little respect. So, before we go any further, I'd like to personally thank Mr. Larson for his many years of service, lest we forget. Now, having said that, it does just so happen that Mr. Larson was also constantly trying to strike it rich through a variety of, let's say, underhanded schemes. There was the time he used a family member's name to establish a fake company, hire himself to that company, and then subsequently fire himself so he could collect unemployment. And then of course there were all of those checking accounts Mike opened just so he could withdraw the $500 in promotional money that came with each new account before immediately turning around and closing those accounts. Does that make him an evil ice cream man? Not in my book. To me, this is a classic case of don't hate the player, hate the game. Michael Larson loved game shows, which makes a lot of sense. After all, what's a game show if not a giant, nationally broadcast, flashing, color-laden opportunity to get rich quick? Or so they appear at least. It's here that I should mention the other thing that Michael loved: knowledge. Michael Larson was a really, really smart guy. Like I said in the intro, he's up there with the best of the best from Jeopardy, and as you'll soon see, maybe even above them in brainpower. You see, Michael Larson took that galaxy brain of his and applied it to his other passion. He would spend hours each morning watching the daytime game show lineups on network TV, searching for any show that might be vulnerable to his particular set of skills. Michael was also well aware that most game shows are very similar to casinos, the other giant, flashing, color-laden, get-rich-quick opportunity, in that both casinos and game shows are designed to give the house an edge, or in other words, an advantage over the player. Sure, in both cases, you could win some money. The illusion of the possibility for instant wealth does need to remain intact to attract new players, but the odds of sustained success in many of these games are mathematically engineered in such a way to ensure that the house, or the production company in the case of a game show, never loses in the long run. Blackjack is widely considered to be the most popular casino game in the world. This is likely due to 2 reasons. First off, amongst casino games, blackjack stands out as having the best odds of winning in the long run. The house edge in the majority of blackjack games is just about 2%, and if you compare that to the edge for other popular games, nothing really even comes close to that line. And second, those odds can actually be improved through player agency, if that player implements what is called basic strategy. Basic blackjack strategy can essentially be boiled down to this table, which based on probability indicates whether or not a player should hit, stand, double down, or surrender on any given hand. Perfect use of basic strategy reduces the house edge from 2% to about 0.5%. In this sense, blackjack is more than just a game of luck. But what if you went one step beyond basic strategy to a system of playing that removes the house edge entirely and instead gives the player the advantage? Counting cards is an advanced technique employed by a select few blackjack players that allows those players to know when to bet big and when to play it slow. Card counting is one of those things that's easy to learn but hard to master, and therefore there aren't a whole lot of people who can effectively do it in a casino setting. The few gamblers who can pull this off are known as
Advantaged players.
because their counting has erased the house edge and given the player the statistical upper hand. Contrary to popular belief, counting cards is not illegal. However, that doesn't mean that casinos won't ask you to stop playing or even throw you out if they catch you counting. It's a cheat code. You can play with it, but if someone catches on to what you're doing, you might get kicked from the game. This is precisely what Michael Larson was looking for, a game show in which the format could be technically exploited in order to statistically guarantee success. A game show in which you could count cards. And as we know already, he found exactly that in the form of Press Your Luck. So how'd he do it? Where was the crack that allowed Michael Larson to break this game wide open? Well, I mean, spoiler alert, it was on the big board. Come on, where else is it gonna be? After discovering the show around the time of its debut, Larson began to record every episode of Press Your Luck onto VHS tapes. With tapes in hand, he assembled what could only be described as a battle station. A double-decker wall of technology, with the lower half comprising a base of 3 25-inch TVs with 4 or 5 more small TVs on top of those. Each of these television sets was paired with a VCR, giving Michael the analog ability to watch multiple episodes of Press Your Luck simultaneously. It was from this point that his genius work could truly begin. With little to no paying work during the cold months of the ice cream off-season, Michael had plenty of time to watch, and watch, and watch. Day after day, episode after episode, spin after spin, Michael was certain that somewhere, buried within that blinking spiral of cash, trips to the Bahamas, and whammies, there was a pattern. It had to be there. No matter what, patterns will always emerge in nature. He just had to find it now. He just had to have faith in the chaos. This is Darren Aronofsky's Pi. I interrupt the story of Michael Larson for a brief excursion to the story of Max Cohen, protagonist of the 1998 paranoid thriller Pi. This might seem like a completely unrelated tangent, and in a way it is, but at the same time, I can't help but take this opportunity to try and relate this movie to the Michael Larson scandal. Just trust me on this one. Faith in chaos, remember? Pi is the feature-length directorial debut of Darren Aronofsky, who is, without a doubt, one of my absolute favorite filmmakers. In most cases, his work is not what you'd call a pleasant movie-going experience. By that, I don't mean that it's impossible to enjoy an Aronofsky movie, but his style certainly isn't everyone's cup of tea. His films often play out like extremely confrontational, manic paranoia trips that spiral further and further out of control until the viewer can barely stand it anymore. Much of that is the result of his stylistic choices. Aronofsky tends to use grating sound effects, frequent cuts from extreme close-ups to long shots, and an ultra-rapid editing technique that he named and pretty much invented called the hip-hop montage. The classic example of a hip-hop montage would be seen in Aronofsky's seminal sophomore effort, Requiem for a Dream. I'm guessing a lot more of you are familiar with Requiem for a Dream compared to Pi, and maybe for good reason. Requiem for a Dream is an excellent movie with special performances from big names, and although it's difficult to watch, it's one of my favorites. If for some reason you're looking for something similar, Pi is the answer. You can kind of think of Pi as Requiem's little brother, especially when you consider that many of the same people worked on both films. This includes much of the crew and some of the actors, like Mark Margolis, Ben Shankman, Samia Shoaib, and leading man Sean Goulet, who plays the aforementioned Max Cohen. Max is a number theorist who lives alone in a rundown New York City apartment. He's a genius intellectually, but at the same time, he is also plagued with head-splitting migraines, hallucinations, and desperate paranoia.
When I was a little kid, my mother told me not to stare into the sun. So once when I was 6, I did. The doctors didn't know if my eyes would ever heal. I was terrified, alone in that darkness. Slowly, daylight crept in through the bandages, and I could see. But something else had changed inside me. That day I had my first headache.
Most of Max's life is consumed by his work. He's turned the majority of his apartment into a sprawling supercomputer named Euclid. On the surface, Max's goal is to strike it rich quick by programming Euclid to make stock predictions. Max is convinced, obsessed even, with the idea that there exists a pattern hidden somewhere within the stock market, and that therefore, one day, he will be able to make a breakthrough.
1245. Restate my assumptions. 1. Mathematics is the language of nature. 2. Everything around us can be represented and understood through numbers. 3. If you graph the numbers of any system, patterns emerge. Therefore, there are patterns everywhere in nature. Evidence. The cycling of disease epidemics. The wax and wane of caribou populations. Sunspot cycles. The rise and fall of the Nile. So what about the stock market? A universe of numbers that represents the global economy. Millions of human hands at work, billions of minds, a vast network, screaming with life. An organism. A natural organism. My hypothesis, within the stock market, there is a pattern as well. Right in front of me, hiding behind the numbers. Always has been. 1250, press return.
Things change for Max when Euclid crashes after returning just one stock pick and printing out a 216-digit number that Max assumes is nonsense. From there, a strange pattern starts to emerge in Max's life. First, Max meets a Hasidic Jew named Lenny in a diner. It turns out that Lenny also happens to work with numbers, using the Torah as his dataset.
Yo, Hebrew's all math. It's all numbers. You know that? Yeah, look. The ancient Jews used Hebrew as their numerical system, eh? Each letter's a number. Like the Hebrew A, Aleph, it's 1. B, Bet, it's 2. You understand? But look at this. The numbers are interrelated. Like, take the Hebrew word for father. Av, Aleph, Bet. 1, 2 equals 3. All right? Hebrew word for mother, Aim, Aleph, Mem. 1, 40 equals 41. Sum of 3 and 41, 44. All right? Now, Hebrew word for child. All right? Mother, father, child. Yelad. That's 10, 30, and 4. 44. Torah is just a long string of numbers.
Lenny reveals that under this numeric interpretation of Hebrew, the Torah can be seen as one long string of numbers that form a code sent directly from God. And beyond that, that the Hebrew words for the Garden of Eden and the Tree of Knowledge correspond to the numbers 144 and 233 respectively, the 12th and 13th numbers in the Fibonacci sequence.
144, 233. And you can take those numbers. So
You know, like the Fibonacci sequence?
Fibonacci.
Fibonacci's an Italian mathematician in the 13th century. If you divide 144 into 233, the result approaches theta.
Theta?
Theta. The Greek symbol for golden ratio, golden spiral.
Wow. I never saw that before. That's like that series you find in nature? Like the face of a sunflower?
Wherever the spirals.
You see this math everywhere.
I don't want to explain much more because I really don't want to spoil this movie. I think it's one you should really see. But what I will tell you is that from here, things for Max begin to spiral progressively more and more out of control. His old mentor mentions coming across a similar 216-digit bug during his days researching pi. Euclid's singular rogue stock pick comes true. A shady Wall Street agency, as well as Lenny and his associates, press in on Max as they also search for the 216-digit number, and this only serves to crank Max's paranoia into overdrive. Much of the filmmaking here reflects what's going on in Max's head. When Max experiences his headaches, we as the viewer are made to experience them too via claustrophobic angles and shrill, ear-splitting sound effects. Speaking of the movie's sound, you could make an argument that the entire soundtrack for Pi is a reflection of Max's headspace. For instance, when he's relatively stable, we don't hear much, if any, music. However, there is often a soft, persistent ticking or humming in the quiet scenes, like the audio equivalent of constantly bouncing your leg up and down, which I think is a cool way of illustrating that Max's brain is constantly turning. He's a computer that can't power off. When we do hear music, it's like this fast-paced techno synth that feels right at home in this movie. Just like the characters and the filmmaking, Clint Mansell's score is both meticulous and unhinged, and I, for one, adore it. This movie's distinctive black and white look is another highlight for me. This was Aronofsky's first feature after film school, so it's only natural that he would opt for the much more affordable black and white film stock. The finished product might look a little raw, but that's actually what Aronofsky was going for. He shot in a lot of high contrast light while indoors to achieve this particular look, and I think that approach really paid off, as Max's apartment and the rest of New York feel like two different worlds. I kind of feel like this whole movie exists in a different world. It often feels like a dream. Characters' voices tend to trail off. The city is a little more empty than it should be. Everything is just a little off. You can recognize this world, but something is different for sure, and you can't quite place it. I know I've been a little vague in general because, like I already said, I really don't want to spoil this movie, but to sum it up, imagine filmmaking similar to Requiem for a Dream, only instead of drugs, the story is about a reclusive genius who's looking to get rich quick using a wall of technology to search for a pattern no one else even knew was there. Sound familiar? I totally get it if Pi is not your thing, but I absolutely love movies like this. It somehow manages to explore God and math and mental illness all at once, and presents it in a way that I find both hypnotic and haunting. With a runtime of just an hour and 25 minutes, it's not a huge time investment either, so I really do recommend at least giving it a shot. It's bizarre and dreamlike and cold, and the music is top-notch, and the performances, particularly from Sean Goulet, are so strong. It's a striking brainworm of a film, one that sticks in your head and will have you looking for spirals everywhere you go. In a parallel world, the real one I guess, Michael Larson was searching for his own pattern, his very own golden spiral. And this time, don't worry, I'm going to tell you exactly what he found. Michael studied his VHS recordings of Press Your Luck for weeks on end, rewinding the same episodes over and over in search of a pattern. He would watch his multiple screens with a focus and purpose that Larson's former wife described as, quote, trance-like, unquote. Through dozens, if not hundreds of hours of study, Michael didn't find a pattern. He found 5. Michael discovered that the big board wasn't truly random after all. Instead, the squares on the board lit up in 5 different predetermined sequences, and that these sequences were also in a predetermined order. He discovered this by numbering the squares on the big board using the numbers 1 through 18 ordered clockwise. This not only helped him decipher the patterns, but also led to the critical realization that squares 4 and 8 would never have a whammy. Therefore, if Michael could guarantee a stop on one of these squares, his money would never be at risk. But here's the kicker. Michael also deduced that square 4 in particular would always display high cash values plus a bonus spin if it was in the second round when lit up. What this means is that if Michael could guarantee a stop on square 4, he could theoretically earn infinite winnings in the second round and never get a whammy. So how did Michael guarantee that he could land on square 4? Easy. He did what any normal genius level individual would do and fully memorized all 5 patterns, all of which contained 18 different pieces. He then honed in on one pattern in particular, in which he paid close attention for square 2 to light up. From there, he knew it would go to 12, then to 1, then to 9, and finally to 4, where he would hit stop. Larson practiced his technique at home by pausing his VCRs in the same way that he would stop the big board if he was actually on the show. When he finally felt that he had perfected the patterns, Michael Larson used most of his savings to fly to Los Angeles and audition for Press Your Luck. He was quickly cast as a likable, yet down on his luck ice cream man, and was subsequently booked for a shooting date of May 19th, 1984. Here we are. The moment has finally arrived. Press Your Luck episode 188. As we open up, everything seems normal. The crowd's going nuts because the applause sign told them to. Half the set's flying around looking like something you'd see at Six Flags. And oh, here comes the host, Peter Tamarkin, who is, looking damn good on this particular occasion. My guy was dripped out for what would become the show's biggest episode. Come on, that tasteful Miami Vice color scheme on that quintessential game show host textured suit. Hall of Fame stuff right here. Alright, let's meet the contestants. Starting with the returning champ, Ed Long. Ed was a California-based Baptist minister, and I have to say, the man looks like he was born to be on an 80s game show. Those glasses, that mustache, Ed gives off a real Teddy from Memento type energy. Ed must have been feeling pretty good coming into this episode, considering he had just won a little more than $11.5 grand in his first performance. That's $30,000 in today's money. One more thing about Ed. Before his first game of Press Your Luck, Ed bumped into a man backstage in the green room. The man happened to also be a contestant waiting to play his first game. The man asked Ed how many times he had seen the show before. When Ed responded that he had only seen the show once, the man's face became a mixture of bewilderment and repulsion. Before Ed went out on stage for his first game, the man said, quote, "I really hope we don't have to play each other," unquote. I think we all know who the man in the green room was, and if somehow you don't, well, you won't have to look very far to find out. We're all familiar with Mikey in the middle here, so let's move right along to contestant number 3, Janie Littress. She's a cool, hip 80s lady, and that's about all I can say. She's a little bit of a passenger on this crazy train. Speaking of which, buckle up. Here we go, first round. We're playing for spins.
Average
40.
gets a spin.
$50 bill.
Ed goes to 2.
I really should know this.
Yeah. So, stick with us.
When the dust settled following the first trivia round, Michael found himself with the fewest number of spins. Just 3 compared to Ed's 4 and Janie's 10. That meant that he would go first at the big board. In other words, it was Mike's time to shine. Let's see the master go to work.
Come on, big bucks, big bucks. I'm going stop!
He got a win.
That's right, Michael Larson got a whammy on his very first spin. He could have just been nervous. He could have done it on purpose to put doubt in the producers' heads for later on. Or he could have just misjudged the button timing. All I can do is speculate. But for what it's worth, he did land on square 4 with his other 2 spins, although he was not awarded any bonus spins on account of it still being the first round. Michael was in last place at the end of this round.
Spins.
Cold.
Strange puppy.
Polka.
A fall.
Michael to 7, the big board.
The tables had turned after the second round of questions, as this time Michael earned the highest amount of spins. However, since he had the smallest bank, he would again go first on the big board. And so, a legend begins. First spin. Stop on square 4. 4,000 and a spin. Second spin, stop at square 4, 5,000 in a spin. Third spin, stop at square 8, 1,000 in a spin. After the third spin, something amazing happens.
Spin. You haven't lost a spin, Michael.
I ain't never losing. Let's go.
Done.
There it is, folks. Michael broke character for the first time. The jig was up. The unassuming Southern ice cream man had given way to the calculated game show genius. Peter, my man, you're about to get taken for a ride. Ted, Janie, Gigi, thanks for coming out. Enjoy the Michael Larson Show.
20, 6,000, 80,000, 336, and Michael says, let's go. Not been able to complete our game in the appointed time. Again! What a hunk of money to ride. That is it. Michael, you have where it's going. 79,351. Michael, stop at 4,000 and it's $90,000. 94. Go again.
Backstage, it didn't take long for the Press Your Luck producers to realize what was happening. Normally, the odds of hitting a whammy were 1 in 6, so what Michael was doing shouldn't be possible, unless he memorized the patterns. He had beaten their game. All they could do was sit back and watch while he stacked their money to whatever height satisfied him. 40 spins, 0 whammies, $102,851 worth of prizes. And after some brief spin passing to end the game following the big run, Larson pushed his winnings up to $104,950 in cash and $5,287 worth of prizes and vacations. By the way, that's the equivalent of nearly 280 grand in today's money. At the time, this was by far the most anybody had won in game show history. Before Michael Larson, the biggest ever game show winner was Joyce Brothers, a psychologist from New York. Joyce Brothers was a lot more than just a game show winner. In fact, she was often called the face of American psychology for many years. But this video does not have room for another big tangent, so I'll keep it short here. In 1955, Joyce won the grand prize on the $64,000 question, a basic quiz show where contestants choose a topic and then answer questions that get progressively more and more difficult in that category. For her topic, Joyce picked boxing because 1, her husband was a huge fan of the sport, and 2, because she had a photographic memory. She studied her husband's boxing encyclopedias and then went and mopped the floor with host Hal Marchand all of his questions. It was mostly light work for Joyce, who would actually come back and win the show's all-star version too, which means she would have pocketed the equivalent of $1.3 million in winnings from this pathetic TV show when adjusted for inflation. Yeah, like I said, Joyce Brothers is a whole nother can of worms. Maybe we'll get into that another time. So there you have it. Michael Larson had cheated Press Your Luck out of more than $100,000. But wait, did he even cheat? Is memorizing the patterns cheating? You're probably saying, hey, wait a minute, I thought this video was about a guy who cheated on a game show. Well, so did I when I first started making this video. But after I reviewed the tape and got the full picture, I think it's Michael who's been cheated here. Cheated out of a good reputation. In every list and video and article about cheaters on game shows, Michael Larson is all but guaranteed to be heavily featured. In the 2003 Game Show Network original documentary titled
Big Bucks, the Press Your Luck Scandal,
which was actually pretty helpful while making this video, by the way, Larson was made out to be almost cartoonishly evil, and it's clear that the producers of the documentary had an axe to grind with everyone's new favorite ice cream man. But even this documentary, where they spend like an hour building Michael up to be this awful cheater who we should all be rooting against, admits that he really didn't break any rules.
What was illegal about the process? He beat the system.
Instead, he broke their game. He cracked the code. He found the pattern. He solved pi. Michael Larson is not a cheater. You want to talk game show cheaters? Oh, I'll show you some game show cheaters. Exhibit A. Adriana Abanea, a celebrity contestant on a 2014 episode of the classic Spanish game show Pasa Palabra. During a segment that was essentially just a game of Name That Tune, Abanea had the audacity to use her phone in a covert attempt to Shazam the songs, the most egregious of all Name That Tune sins.
cheater.
Exhibit B, Charles Ingram, a British contestant on a 2001 episode of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. After a very rocky start in which he all but threw away 2 of his lifelines, Ingram went on to win the $1 million top prize. Was this turnaround a miracle, or was Charles a cheater? Here's a hint, it's the second one. He cheated. Alright, follow me on this one. So Charles's wife Diana and her brother Adrian had both already been contestants on the show, with each managing to earn about £32,000 in prize money. During Charles's appearance on the show, both Diana and Adrian were in the audience, and it just so happened that both of them had this really nasty, persistent cough on the day of the shoot.
I would have thought that it would.
It was this strange, deliberate sort of cough, almost as if it were a secret code or something. Oh wait, it was. Diana and Adrian were actually signaling to Charles with their coughs, not so discreetly telling him which answers were right and wrong, and also making him
a cheater.
And Exhibit C, Dan Enright. This guy wasn't actually ever a contestant on a game show, and that's because he was a game show producer during the big quiz show boom in the 50s that I mentioned earlier. Enright was co-producer on the biggest of the quiz shows, 21. However, 21 didn't start out on top, and this was mainly due to, let's say, subpar contestant performances. In an effort to boost ratings, Enright decided that 21 should be rigged in order to increase the show's entertainment value. The fix was in when Enright began coaching a contestant named Herb Stempel, feeding him the correct answers through an electronic headset. With the voice of Dan Enright in his ear, Stempel went on a thrilling winning streak that saw 21's rating go up, but not enough to satisfy old Dan. Enright scouted for a successor to Stempel and found his man in Charles Van Doren, an English professor at Columbia. When Stempel and Van Doren faced off on the show, their match was rigged to end in a tie 3 times in a row in order to build up hype. Then, with the show's newly achieved massive audience all glued to their screens for the 4th matchup, Dan Enright, who had never led Stempel astray before, purposefully fed the defending champ an incorrect answer, which in turn handed Van Doren the victory. This is top 10 anime betrayal material right here. There's actually a whole lot more to this story too, and if you're interested and want to know more, you should check out the 1994 film Quiz Show. For now, just know that even though he wasn't a contestant, Dan Enright was a massive game show cheater. Michael Larson should not be grouped with the Adriana Abaneas, Charles Ingrams, and Dan Enrights of the world, and yet he always is. It's not fair. Michael wasn't like them. He won his money fair and square, and then he disappeared. Not much is known about Michael's life after his appearance on Press Your Luck. I did some looking, but I wasn't able to find a whole lot other than one small story which I simply have to tell. You might be wondering, what did Michael do with his winnings? He did exactly what you'd expect Michael Larson to do with them. Used all that money to try to make even more quick money. One of the ways he did this was through a radio contest which was giving away $30,000 to anyone who could match the serial number on a dollar bill. It just so happened that Michael Larson had access to quite a few dollar bills. This madman withdrew somewhere around $50K exclusively in $1 bills in his effort to win the radio contest. All of this cash was in Michael's house when he left for a Christmas party in 1984. When he returned, the money was gone. The house had been broken into, and all of those $1 bills had disappeared forever. Now, I'm fully aware that by titling this video how I did, I'm doing nothing but adding to the slander against Michael Larson, but I had to get you to click on the video somehow, and while I may be part of the problem, I'm also going to be part of the solution. I will no longer tolerate any Michael Larson slander, and I call on you to do the same. Hashtag Justice for Mike. If you made it this far in the video, leave a comment with that hashtag. This whole video, in a way, is my salute to Michael Larson, a man who is not the biggest game show cheater ever, but instead, a game show genius. He is the answer to the question, what do you get when you mix Ken Jennings and Max Cohen? And a reminder, if we look hard enough, we'll find patterns and connections everywhere. Thank you for watching. I know, it's been a long time since I've uploaded, and I'm sorry about that. While this video did take like a long time to make, I was also kind of held up in ways by life that I wasn't intending or anticipating, but that'll happen. So I want to let you know that while it might be a fair few weeks in between my uploads, I'm not going to go 3 months without uploading again. Also, part 2 on my series about old school Survivor, as well as quite a few other ideas that I've got in the works, are on their way. I can't give you any specific dates on anything, but like I said, it shouldn't be too long in between videos from now on. If you like what I'm doing, please subscribe and like the video. Those 2 clicks really do help a lot, and I really appreciate it so much. All the support I've been getting lately has been amazing. And with that said, I just want to say thank you again for watching, especially if you got this far, and of course, #Justice for Mike.